The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training ground as Sarah Mitchell adjusted her helmet one final time. She had been the only female recruit in Delta Squadron for 8 months now, and every day brought new challenges that went far beyond the physical demands of combat training. The other soldiers had gradually accepted her presence, but Sergeant Marcus Kane remained her most vocal critic. Sarah wiped the sweat from her forehead as she prepared for the day's hand-to-hand combat exercise. She had worked twice as hard as anyone else to prove herself worthy of being there. Her father, a decorated war veteran, had always told her that respect was earned through actions, not words. Today felt different, though. There was tension in the air that she couldn't quite place. Kane strutted across the training mat with his usual arrogance. His eyes locked on Sarah with undisguised contempt. He had made it clear from day one that he believed women had no place in combat units. His comments had grown more aggressive recently, and Sarah sensed that today would be the day he tried to prove his point through force rather than words. The other recruits gathered around the training area, some looking uncomfortable with what they suspected might happen. Sarah's best friend in the unit, Private Johnson, caught her eye and gave her an encouraging nod. She had trained for this moment, knowing that Kane would eventually try to humiliate her in front of everyone. As the instructor called for the sparring session to begin, Kane stepped forward with a twisted smile. He was bigger, stronger, and had years more experience than Sarah. But she had something he didn't expect: determination forged by months of enduring his harassment, and a tactical mind that had been shaped by countless hours of study and preparation. The circle of soldiers tightened around them as Kane raised his fists. Sarah took a deep breath, remembering every lesson her instructors had taught her about using an opponent's size and aggression against them. She knew this fight would determine not just her future in the unit, but whether other women would ever get the chance to serve alongside them. Kane's confidence was evident in every movement as he approached her. He had bragged to other soldiers about how he would show everyone that women were too weak for military service. What he didn't realize was that Sarah had been preparing for this confrontation since the day she arrived. She had studied his fighting style, his weaknesses, and his tendency to let anger cloud his judgment. The training ground fell silent except for the sound of their breathing and the distant noise of other military exercises. Sarah's heart pounded, but her mind remained clear and focused. She knew that the next few minutes would change everything, not just for her, but for the entire unit. The weight of responsibility sat heavy on her shoulders as she prepared to face her greatest challenge yet. Kane moved first, throwing a heavy right hook aimed directly at Sarah's head. His intention was clear. He wanted to end this quickly and decisively. But Sarah had anticipated this exact move. She ducked under his swing and stepped to the side, causing Kane to stumble forward with the momentum of his missed punch. The watching soldiers murmured as Sarah landed a quick jab to Kane's ribs before dancing back out of range. Kane's face flushed red with embarrassment and rage. He had expected to overwhelm her immediately, but she had made him look foolish in front of the entire unit. His pride was wounded, and that made him even more dangerous. Kane charged forward again, this time with both fists flying in a wild combination. Sarah weaved between his punches, using her smaller size and superior agility to stay just out of reach. Each miss made Kane more frustrated and less controlled. Sarah could see the anger building in his eyes, and she knew it was exactly what she needed to gain the advantage. Private Johnson and the other soldiers watched in amazement as Sarah continued to outmaneuver Kane. Some had secretly hoped she would succeed, while others remained loyal to Kane's old-fashioned views. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife as the fight continued to escalate. Sarah saw her opening when Kane overextended himself on a particularly aggressive swing. She stepped inside his guard and delivered a precise uppercut that snapped his head back. For a moment, Kane looked stunned, his confidence shaken for the first time since the fight began. The crowd of soldiers erupted in surprised shouts and cheers, but Kane's embarrassment quickly turned to fury. The fact that a woman had landed such a clean hit on him in front of his peers was more than his ego could handle. His military training told him to respect his opponent and fight with honor, but his personal prejudices overrode his professionalism. He decided to abandon the rules of sparring and teach Sarah what he considered a permanent lesson. Sarah noticed the change in Kane's demeanor immediately. His stance shifted, his breathing became more aggressive, and she could see a dangerous glint in his eyes. She tried to signal to the instructor that something was wrong, but Kane was already moving. This time, he wasn't fighting to win a sparring match. He was fighting to seriously hurt her. Kane feinted left, and then launched himself forward with a vicious headbutt aimed directly at Sarah's face. The move was completely against training regulations and could cause serious injury or even death. Sarah tried to dodge, but Kane's sudden change in tactics caught her off guard. The impact was devastating, and she felt herself falling backward as darkness began to creep in around the edges of her vision. Sarah's world exploded into stars and pain as Kane's head connected with hers. The force of the illegal blow sent her crashing to the ground, blood streaming from a cut above her left eye. The watching soldiers gasped in horror as they realized Kane had crossed a line that should never be crossed in training exercises. Kane stood over Sarah's fallen form, breathing heavily and showing no remorse for what he had done. His knuckles were white as he clenched his fists, ready to continue his assault if she tried to get up. The other recruits looked on in shock, unsure whether to intervene or remain silent. Private Johnson started to step forward, but Kane's threatening glare stopped him in his tracks. The training instructor, Sergeant Williams, rushed onto the mat and immediately called for medical assistance. Sarah lay motionless for several terrifying seconds before slowly beginning to stir. Blood pooled beneath her head, and it was clear that Kane's attack had caused serious damage. Williams knew that this incident would have consequences far beyond what anyone present could imagine. Sarah struggled to focus her vision as she tried to sit up. The world spun around her and she could taste blood in her mouth. Through her confusion and pain, she could hear Kane speaking to the other soldiers, trying to justify his actions by claiming he was proving that women couldn't handle real combat situations. His words filled her with a determination that even her injuries couldn't diminish. As the medical team arrived and began treating Sarah's wounds, news of the incident began to spread throughout the base. Word traveled quickly through the chain of command that a training exercise had gone seriously wrong. Phone calls were made, reports were filed, and within an hour, the situation had reached the attention of some very important people. Meanwhile, Kane continued to boast about his actions to anyone who would listen. He seemed genuinely convinced that he had done the right thing, and that his superiors would praise him for exposing what he saw as a fundamental weakness in allowing women in combat roles. He had no idea that his assault on Sarah had been witnessed by security cameras, and that his fate was already being decided in offices far above his pay grade. Sarah was taken to the base medical facility, where doctors confirmed that she had suffered a severe concussion and would need several stitches to close the cut on her forehead. As she lay in the hospital bed, her thoughts weren't on her injuries, but on what would happen next. She knew that this incident would either destroy her military career or become the catalyst for real change. The news of the attack reached the base commander within 2 hours. General Patricia Hayes had been following Sarah's progress closely, as she was one of the first women to be integrated into this particular combat unit. When she learned about Kane's assault, her response was swift and decisive. She immediately contacted 2 of her most trusted colleagues to discuss how to handle this situation. General Hayes wasted no time in contacting General Robert Crawford and General Maria Santos, 2 of the most respected military leaders on the base. The 3 generals had been closely monitoring the integration of women into combat units, and they knew that how they handled this situation would set a precedent for the entire military. Crawford was known for his unwavering commitment to military discipline and protocol. He had served in 3 different conflicts and had zero tolerance for soldiers who violated the code of conduct. When Hayes briefed him on Kane's assault, his reaction was immediate and decisive. There would be no cover-up, no attempt to minimize the incident, and no mercy for Kane's actions. Santos brought a unique perspective to the situation as one of the highest-ranking female officers in the military. She had faced her own battles with discrimination and harassment throughout her career, and she understood exactly what Sarah had endured. Her presence on the response team sent a clear message that this incident would be taken seriously at the highest levels. The 3 generals met in Hayes' office exactly 93 minutes after the assault took place. Security footage of the incident had already been reviewed, witness statements were being collected, and a complete investigation was underway. Kane's fate was sealed before he even realized that his actions had been reported up the chain of command. While the generals planned their response, Kane continued his shift as if nothing had happened. He even went to lunch with some of the other soldiers, regaling them with his version of events and expressing his hope that Sarah would be transferred out of the unit. He seemed completely oblivious to the storm that was gathering around him. Sarah, meanwhile, remained in the medical facility under observation. Her concussion was serious enough that doctors wanted to monitor her for at least 24 hours. As she lay in bed with her head pounding, she wondered if her military career was over before it had really begun. She had no way of knowing that powerful allies were already working to ensure justice would be served. The three generals spent the afternoon reviewing military law, consulting with legal experts, and planning their course of action. Kane's assault on Sarah wasn't just a violation of training protocols. It was a criminal act that demanded the strongest possible response. They were determined to send a message that would resonate throughout the entire military structure. By late afternoon, all the pieces were in place. The investigation was complete, the evidence was overwhelming, and the generals had reached their decision. Kane's commanding officer was notified that he should prepare Delta Squadron for an unscheduled inspection and disciplinary action. The time for justice had arrived, and it would be swift and decisive. At exactly 1600 hours, the three generals arrived at Delta Squadron's barracks unannounced. Their presence immediately sent shockwaves through the unit, as such high-ranking officers rarely visited training facilities without advance notice. Kane was in the middle of cleaning his equipment when word spread that generals were on the premises. The entire squadron was ordered to assemble in the main briefing room within 5 minutes. Soldiers scrambled to put on their dress uniforms and present themselves properly. Kane felt a slight uneasiness but assumed the visit was routine. He had convinced himself that his actions against Sarah were justified and that any investigation would vindicate his position. General Hayes entered the room first, followed by Crawford and Santos. The silence was absolute as nearly 50 soldiers stood at attention. Kane was positioned in the third row, still unaware that he was the primary reason for this unprecedented visit. His confidence remained intact as he waited to hear what the generals had to say. Hayes stepped forward and began speaking in a clear, authoritative voice that commanded respect from every person in the room. She outlined the military's commitment to equal treatment and opportunity for all soldiers, regardless of gender, race, or background. Her words carried weight that every soldier understood. This was not a casual speech, but a formal declaration of policy. Crawford then took center stage and began discussing the importance of honor, integrity, and adherence to military law. He explained that the military's strength came from unity and mutual respect among all service members. As he spoke, Kane began to realize that something was seriously wrong, though he still didn't fully grasp the gravity of his situation. Santos stepped forward and directly addressed the issue of harassment and assault within military ranks. She made it clear that such behavior would not be tolerated under any circumstances, and that those who violated these principles would face the full consequences of military justice. Her eyes seemed to look directly at Kane as she spoke, and he finally began to understand why the generals were there. The room remained silent as Hayes called for Sergeant Marcus Kane to step forward. Every head turned to look at him as he walked toward the front of the room, his legs feeling weak beneath him. For the first time since the incident, Kane realized that his assault on Sarah had been taken seriously by the highest levels of command. Standing before the three generals, Kane felt smaller than he ever had in his military career. Hayes read the charges against him in a voice that echoed throughout the room. Assault, conduct unbecoming a soldier, violation of training protocols, and harassment. Each word hit Kane like a physical blow as he realized his military career was ending in disgrace before his peers. General Crawford announced Kane's immediate termination from military service with a dishonorable discharge. The decision was final and effective immediately. Kane's military benefits, pension rights, and veteran status were all revoked. He would leave the base that very day and would never be allowed to wear a military uniform again. The shock on Kane's face was evident to everyone in the room. He had expected a reprimand at worst, perhaps some additional training or a temporary suspension. The reality that his entire military career was ending in complete disgrace hit him like a thunderbolt. His legs nearly gave out beneath him as the full weight of the consequences settled in. Santos stepped forward and addressed the entire unit about the importance of protecting all soldiers, regardless of their gender or background. She made it clear that Kane's actions did not represent the values of the military, and that such behavior would always result in severe consequences. Her words resonated with every soldier present, sending a clear message about expected standards of conduct. The three generals then departed as quickly as they had arrived, leaving Kane to face the stares and whispers of his former colleagues. Military police arrived within minutes to escort him from the premises. He was given 1 hour to collect his personal belongings before being permanently banned from the base. Meanwhile, Sarah was informed of the general's decision while she recovered in the medical facility. The news brought tears to her eyes, not because she felt vindicated, but because she realized that real change was possible. The swift and decisive action taken by the military leadership showed that her sacrifice had meaning and that future female soldiers would be better protected. Word of Kane's termination spread throughout the entire base within hours. The message was clear. Harassment and assault would not be tolerated, and even seasoned soldiers would face severe consequences for such behavior. The incident became a turning point in how the military handled cases of discrimination and violence. Private Johnson and several other soldiers visited Sarah in the medical facility to express their support and admiration for her courage. Many admitted that they had witnessed Kane's harassment over the months, but had been too afraid to report it. Sarah's willingness to stand up to him had inspired them to speak out about other instances of misconduct they had observed. 6 months later, Sarah returned to active duty with Delta Squadron, which had been restructured under new leadership. She was promoted to corporal and became an instructor for new recruits, both male and female. Her story became part of the training curriculum, demonstrating the importance of integrity, courage, and standing up for what is right. Kane's dishonorable discharge followed him into civilian life, making it difficult for him to find employment and destroying his reputation in his hometown. The consequences of his actions served as a powerful reminder that personal prejudices and violent behavior have no place in military service. The incident ultimately led to policy changes throughout the military regarding the integration of women into combat units. Sarah's courage in facing Kane's assault, combined with the decisive action of the three generals, created a safer environment for all soldiers and strengthened the military's commitment to equality and justice.